In 2011, 5 little words changed my life, enabling me to go from being flat broke after being knocked for a considerable chunk of money I was owed, to earning sometimes as much as $14,000 a week some weeks doing something I loved after giving up a 25-year career that I hated. If you want to know what these words are, and more importantly how they could hopefully change your life as well, stick around, because in this video I'm going to share everything with you, the whole story, and then give you real-world examples at the end on how to use them yourself. Let's get into it. When presented with an opportunity to discover 5 words that will change your life, most people won't even bother trying to find out what they are. Maybe they're cynical, they're just trying to sell me something, or perhaps it's something more fundamental. They're happy to accept their lot and are content to live a normal life because, well, that's just how it is. The thing is though, for companies, corporations and even governments, this is great. It suits them fine that the majority of people don't have the desire to break out and lead a freer life where they're in control of their own destiny. Now, if you're anything like me, you love learning new stuff, you're always looking for a bit more, and you don't like being controlled, but instead would rather be in charge of what you do and when you do it. That's certainly how I am, for sure. But who am I, and why should you even listen to me? Well, my name's Jeff Cowtan. Over the last 14 years or so, I've written high-impact sales copy for some of the most successful direct response marketers here in the UK. Letters that have pulled in well over $24 million of sales, predominantly in the make money niche, which means I've seen it all. What works, what doesn't, what's real, what's a scam. And it's because of this I've been wanting to make this video for a while now, to share the 5 words that literally enable me to transform my life to the point where I now get up when I want, work when I want, and pretty much live life how I want to live it. And the reason I want to share these words is so that you, or anybody else who wants to listen, can use them to change their lives too. Okay, let me just set the scene. Now, as a copywriter, in other words, with my copywriting hat on, this should all be about you and what you're going to get out of it. That's copywriting 101. And trust me, you will be getting a lot out of it. But first, I need to explain how these words came about with my own story. Otherwise, you might not really truly grasp how powerful they are. So here's what happened with me. I started my early career as an optician of all things and absolutely hated it. Every day I couldn't wait to go home. It'd be different if it was your own business, they all said. So in 1998, I bought an optician's, and guess what? Yep, hated that as well. The trouble is, the money wasn't too bad, so I put up with it for another 7 years. But then one day I finally decided enough was enough. It was time to do something different. Long story short, I sold the business, virtually gave it away, and agreed that the new owner would pay me out of the profits as he made them. That's how desperate I was to get out. In the meantime, I began dabbling in trying out a new business that I thought might give me some more satisfaction. Unfortunately, my heart wasn't really in selling ink cartridges, so it hardly got off the ground. But then something else happened that completely threw a spanner in the works. Folks, with what I'm about to tell you, life can really throw you a curveball sometimes. And if there's one life lesson on being prepared for the unexpected, I was about to learn it the hard way. It turns out the guy who bought my opticians not only ran it into the ground, but also went bankrupt, which meant he ended up knocking me for the money he owed me, which of course completely stuffed me up. After building that business up for a further 7 years that I hated, not only had I spent this time doing something I couldn't stand, but I now had absolutely nothing to show for it. And I was also now completely broke. Anyway, fast forward a few years and I was still struggling. By this time, I was desperately trying to avoid going back to being an optician by trying to teach myself how to build websites, but I wasn't really getting anywhere. But then out of the blue, I received a rather intriguing sales letter. It was from one of the top direct mail marketers here in the UK. It was highly compelling, basically selling a 2-day marketing course with a view to setting up your own marketing business. Unfortunately, this course also cost $5 grand that I didn't have. However, I discussed it with my wife and we agreed that there did seem to be something in it. So, although it might seem a bit irresponsible, we decided I'd borrow an extra $5 grand on my mortgage and go on the course, but with a proviso. If it didn't work out, I'd finally have to give up my dream of doing something different and go back to what I was qualified in, so I could at least start earning some decent-ish money again. Anyway, I went on the course and loved it. Don't worry, I'm getting to the 5 words in a bit, I promise. Now, included in the price were the rights to various products, marketing CDs and DVDs, that sort of thing, to rebrand as our own. And we were shown how to market them at the time through paid advertising. We were also shown how to write effective sales copy. And as part of the deal, the guy running the course, one of the top marketers in the UK, don't forget, would also critique any future copy we wrote before we put anything out. Now, this is the crux of the story, which I'll get to in a bit. He demonstrated how to write highly effective sales copy using one of his own sales letters that had brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars. In fact, it might have even been millions, I can't remember. But it really brought home to me how the power of words is one of, or if not the most important part of any sales campaign. Anyway, it all seemed great, and after the course was over, I got stuck in. To cut a long story short, I did what I was shown, developed a few products, and wrote my first sales letter, which I excitedly sent off for analysis. A few days later, I got an email back to say it was okay-ish, but I'd actually missed some of the fundamental points that made people want to buy. Now, to be honest, it was a bit disappointing, but at least I was given some pointers as to where I could make improvements. So onwards and upwards, as they say, back to the drawing board. And this is where it gets interesting. I decided to be a little bit cheeky and took the sales letter that was used for demonstration purposes and used it as a template. I literally substituted all the text, paragraphs, images, lists, and general layout that was there already and adapted everything so the context was the same, but it fitted with my products perfectly. At the end of it, you wouldn't have known that I'd effectively nicked it, because although the structure was the same, it seemed like a completely different letter. Anyhow, I sent it off again for further critique, and this time the reply I got back was very different. The main man himself told me that it was really good and I should run it. So I did and started making a few sales. Not enough to retire on, but enough to break even. However, this is where I had a further problem. The money from the sale of my optician's business had always been earmarked to pursue any other new venture that I became involved with. But now that money was never coming, I ran out of funds very quickly and I couldn't afford to buy any more stock. Of course I could borrow, but at the time I was suffering a little bit from imposter syndrome and started to have doubts as to whether I could really take the risk, especially since I'd borrowed so much money off my mortgage in the first place. So for now, I just put everything on hold. But unfortunately, this couldn't go on. Time was ticking by and it was getting to the point where I'd have to admit defeat and honour the promise I'd made to my wife that I'd give up on the dream if it didn't work out. But I decided on one last throw of the dice. Around 18 months after I'd been on the course, I decided I'd make one last ditch attempt at changing my life by emailing the marketing guy who'd run the course and making him an offer that, as it turned out, was really difficult for him to refuse. In the email, I reminded him that he'd been very complimentary about my sales copy once and suggested I write some copy for him. But here's the thing, and here's the 5 words that I'm talking about. I also said, wait for it, drum roll please, I'll do it for nothing. Now I know that might seem simple, but I promise you, done properly, the return on investment of I'll do it for nothing is exponential. I'm living proof, as I'm about to share with you. Now, before the naysayers say it's technically 6 words, the compounded I'll makes it sound better, so let's stick with the 5. But obviously, by this time, I was just an old customer to him and he couldn't really remember what he'd said. But my offer to do it for nothing got his attention. It made him want to find out more. Anyway, to cut another part of this very long story short, he messaged me back, and after a few more emails back and forth, we arranged to have a telephone conversation to discuss things further. Now, during the time we were waiting to have a chat, because I'm on his mailing list, I'd received another sales letter from him that was selling a self-development course. But this time, the letter itself was nowhere near as good. In fact, it was actually pretty shit. So when the time came that I finally got to talk to him, after introductions and pleasantries, I was able to drop into the conversation that I'd received his last mail shot. To which he said, yeah, it's crap, wasn't it? Now, to be honest, that threw me a bit, but straight away I agreed. He then asked me if I thought I could do any better, to which I obviously replied yes. His reply? Okay, there's your first project. I was blown away. Here I was being given the opportunity to write sales copy for one of the top direct mail marketers in the country, and he'd never even met me. Well, again, to cut a long story short, and yes, I know I keep saying that, but it helps with the flow, so bear with me. I knew I had to do a good job, so I decided to pull the same trick again. I didn't even have access to the self-development product itself, but I could get enough information about it from the poorly written sales letter and then substitute that into the structure of another highly successful letter to produce an outstanding bit of copy that appeared completely original. Now, as a side note, whenever I receive a sales letter I buy from, or even if I'm tempted to buy from, I'll keep it. And you should too, and you'll see why in a moment. In this case, I took a mail shot that I'd received from another marketer. I'm on loads of mailing lists, by the way, that was selling a completely different product. But get this, I'd received that letter maybe 12 or 13 times, so I knew it was successful, because a printed letter campaign is really expensive and direct mail marketers don't keep sending them if they're not making any money. Anyway, this time I used this letter as a template in the same way as before, and once I finished, I sent it off. Well, a few days later, I got a call from the main man again saying, "We've got to meet." He invited me up to his office, and that's when my life changed forever. He couldn't believe that an ex-optician could produce copy of this standard, but was very keen to tell me that he was going to run it. Now, I should also point out that when a marketing campaign is launched, the usual sequence of events is you get the most sales from the first mailing. And then if you run a follow-up campaign, you get about half the turnover again, and each time you run it, thereafter half again and again, and so on. You get the picture. Well, my letter doubled the conversion of his original letter. Needless to say, he was very happy. And even though I'd offered to do it for nothing, which I was happy to honour, he insisted on paying me nearly $8,000. He'd made over 100K, but that's a different story. After that, I was invited to write more sales material, but now I'd officially get paid 5% of the turnover, the going rate at the time. That's not profit, by the way, 5% of the turnover. Over the next few years, I wrote letters that brought in well over $2.5 million each, which meant my cut was over $125,000 a piece. In fact, it was one of these that enabled me to draw around $14,000 a week for 6 straight weeks when it was sent out on the first mailing. It was more money than I'd ever earned in my life, and in my first year alone, I'd tripled my income as an optician. Since then, my career as a copywriter went from strength to strength, and I've now written sales material for other highly successful marketers in the UK and have been responsible for sales, as I said, well over $24 million. But this all came about from offering to do something for nothing, or to put it a better way, something of high value at no cost. Now, here's the thing. If you suggest to most people to work for nothing, the majority would have the mindset of, why should I? Which is, of course, understandable, but it's also why most people will always be working to the point where they're just about keeping their head above water until they're old enough to start thinking about checking out. But rich and successful people don't think like this. They often do things for nothing. In general, they give much more than they get, especially at the beginning of any new venture. They do this because they know that a speculate to accumulate type of attitude will invariably bring in much higher rewards, and they're looking for the quickest way to get the most out of whatever it is they're trying to achieve. Ironically, doing or giving something away for nothing nearly always leads to accumulating much more than if you charge straight away. Now, it's very easy to think that if you do something for nothing, the recipient is likely going to take advantage and exploit what you're offering. But strangely enough, in the vast majority of cases, the exact opposite is true. On the whole, most people are pretty decent, and rather than take advantage, they almost feel guilty about just taking, which in turn inevitably leads them wanting to pay somehow, either there and then or at least at a later date. Think about it. If a friend offers to do something for you for nothing, especially if you know it's what they do for a living, it almost feels awkward taking it and you feel the need to give something back. This is why a doing it for nothing strategy is so successful for getting new customers. Which brings me on to the real world examples of I'll do it for nothing that I was referring to at the beginning of this video. Number 1, if you're starting out in business, or even if you've got a business already, in the early days, people often make the mistake of feeling because they've got something to offer, other people will naturally want it, and so it should be easy to sell stuff. But in reality, this is so far from the truth. If potential customers don't know anything about you or your product, they're not going to buy from you, but instead go to your competitors who are already established, basically because they know them. So how do you get over it? Simple. You're an unknown entity, don't forget. So remove the risk by offering a sample of whatever it is you're selling for nothing. Global companies with massive profits often give free trials of products or services, so why can't you do the same? Freebies are great. They do a couple of things. Everyone likes a bargain, and what better bargain than something for nothing? So once your potential customers are satisfied and hopefully delighted that you're not going to rip them off, they'll be more than happy to buy stuff from you in the future, which means you can turn them into customers for life. Okay, number 2, Another brilliant way you can use the I'll do it for nothing principle is to stand out from the crowd when applying for jobs. When you apply for a job, a potential employer has absolutely no idea whether you're any good or not, and they're actually taking a bit of a gamble taking you on when they've got to pay you straight away. However, if you offer your services temporarily for nothing, not only would you stand out, but you can prove yourself and get to the bigger bucks that much quicker. Okay, number 3, getting testimonials. This is another cracker. Ask any successful marketer and they'll tell you that one of the most important parts of an effective sales campaign is to include glowing testimonials if you've got them. Now, of course, testimonials are important. Although, if you're interested to know why they're not always absolutely essential, I explain this in my Coffee Break Credibility Crash Course, which you can get and download for free. It's only a 5-minute read, and I'll leave a link in the description for you down below to get hold of it. Anyway, back to what we're talking about here. What if you haven't got any testimonials? Well, once again, this is where the old I'll do it for nothing strategy comes into play, or at least a variation of it. You can always give your product or service away for free in return for honest feedback, which when people have paid nothing for it, they're generally more than happy to provide. In fact, they're often so pleased about not being charged, it makes them want to big up the product or service even more. Okay, and that brings us on to number 4, acquiring leads. This is an obvious one. Giving something of value away in exchange for someone's contact details is a tried and tested strategy you probably know already. And I'm sure it goes without saying that whatever it is you're giving away for nothing, your lead magnet should be as valuable as possible, although even if it's not perfect, you can still build and nurture a really productive relationship with your audience if you're honest and upfront with them as you can be. I hope that's coming across in this video. Okay, so there we are. On that final note, when you do something for nothing, it's not just a win-win, it's a win-win-win. You're getting something out of it to prove yourself and get your foot in the door. The recipient is getting something out of it because they can obviously try you out without any risk. And if they've got customers, they're getting something out of it because they get the benefit of what you've got to offer, which they may not have had otherwise. Okay, it really is time for me to wrap it up. I really hope you got something out of me prattling on about doing something for nothing. I truly believe this concept is one of the most powerful ways to lead a richer, happier, healthier, more successful way of life. It literally changed everything for me to the point where I've never looked back. Giving to get is nothing new. In fact, nearly all successful people will tell you the same. But if you're starting out or aren't yet where you want to be, I can pretty much guarantee that putting it in the context of I'll do it for nothing can get you there that much quicker. I think this is the point where I meant to say, if you found this video useful, please like and subscribe. So if you did, please do. If you didn't, then sorry about that, and I'll try and do better next time. Oh, and don't forget to check out my free Coffee Break Credibility Crash Course, which you'll find in the link down below. It's free, it's a 5-minute read, and it's full of all kinds of goodies that will really help you in your creative journey.